Well, thank you very much for joining me in this video. I want to talk to you today about a phenomena known as cash for keys. If you're a residential investor, have some property, from time to time you get into problems with tenants. And that's where our governing legislation, the Residential Tenancies Act, comes into play. Residential Tenancies Act is consumer protection legislation. And I understand that. There needs to be some protection for tenants. It's their home. And them getting evicted is a traumatic situation under normal circumstances. And sometimes there's no-fault evictions where the house is sold and the new owner needs to move in. But unfortunately, there's also times when you have a problem with a tenant, you need to evict them for non-payment of rent, and you've got to rely on the Residential Tenancies Act to support that process through the Landlord and Tenant Board. And that's a problem because the system's broken. I say that because it's so delayed to actually get an eviction order. Let's suppose you have a tenant, been a tenant for a while, they run into a problem, they start being slow, paying their rent, paying part of the rent, and they're going to make it up next week, and you work with them. And this continues on for 2 or 3 months. Next thing you know, they're 2 or 3 months behind. So if they owe you $1,500 a month in rent, it'll be $4,500 before you know it. You know you have to do something, so you issue them an N4 notice. Now, the N4 notice, you can't actually send it to the board until they're given 14 days to pay the rent up. So you lose a half a month there. And then you apply to the board, and the odds are it's going to take 6, 8, 10 months for them to issue some kind of an eviction order, and that's if the tenant doesn't appeal it. If the tenant appeals it, it's going to go on longer than that. So the next thing you know, you could be very easily behind by a year's rent. So instead of $1,500 for 1 month's rent, you're looking at $18,000 in addition to any out-of-pocket expenses for paralegals and so on. So one of the things that has been popular with some residential landlords and with some property managers is this phenomenon of cash for keys. And I want to tell you that I don't particularly endorse it. I don't like rewarding somebody for bad behavior, but I understand it. Now let me go through a typical scenario so you understand what I mean. The example I gave, if the next thing you know, by the time you get an eviction order, they owe you $18,000. So maybe at the start, about the time you're going to send the notice into the Landlord and Tenant Board, you go to the tenant and you say, look, this isn't working out. I need you out. I'll give you, let's say, 2 months rent, which is $3,000, another $1,000 for moving expenses. I'll give you $4,000 cash to move out. And maybe if he's strapped for cash, this gives him the money for first and last for the next landlord, and he's willing to move out. Sure, you're out of pocket another $4,000, but you're not out of pocket $18,000 carrying him month after month after month. Now, he may say, well, I know I can ride this system and I can make it work for a year, and I'm going to lose a whole year of free rent if I move out, and he's not going to move out. You don't know. So it's not a guarantee, but it might help. The problem is that it's becoming a bit of a cottage industry among tenants. There's a landlord and tenant chat line that I've watched a little bit, and there was one situation I saw where a tenant posed the question on the chat line. He said, my landlord is giving me an eviction notice, but he offered me $2,000 to move out. Should I take it? And another tenant added a comment, and he said, $2,000? You're being robbed. Tell him you want at least $20,000. I saw another one, and what happened was the tenant put this on. He said, I just received this letter from my landlord, and it was a wonderful letter, and the letter said, I just hate doing this. I'm so sorry. But he said, my duplex, and this was a duplex, he said, just sold, and the owners need both units. They need to live in it themselves, and they're also the caregivers of some special need family that are going to be moving in the other unit, and so I'm going to be giving you eviction notice at the end of the month. I hate doing it. I'm sorry, but I hope you understand. And the tenant asked the question. He said, what should I do? And one of the other tenants chipped in and said, you should say, I'm not moving under any circumstances unless you give me some money. And he said, start the negotiating process at $50,000. So you've got that sort of thing. And that's obviously means the cash for keys is not going to work. But it may in your situation, and it may be worth looking at. At some point, the solution is to fix the problem at the landlord and tenant board and streamline the process. But in the meantime, if you're going to go with cash for keys, approach the tenant, explain the situation, how much you're offering him, negotiate back and forth, then make sure you get it in writing. After you get it in writing, don't give him the money until he's moved out, until he's surrendered the keys, and then have a locksmith handy to change the lock. And at that point, you want to be very, very careful in making your selection for the next tenant, because when you make a mistake, it's a very costly mistake. And that's not to say that it won't happen. It will happen at some point in time, just because of changing circumstances among tenants. I think it's well worth being in the game, being a landlord, but to be informed and to be cautious in how you move forward is just a prudent thing to do. And cash for keys sometimes going to come into play. Thank you very much for watching this video. I'll talk to you again very soon.